consent agenda.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Thank you. Okay, got a couple minutes, but I see Darcy's on there, so get going shortly. Any objections moving forward with the land use update?
You're the boss.
Yeah, right.
Middle.
There you go.
Recording in progress.
Okay, I think we're ready to get started with the land use plan update with Clarion and Associates. So Darcy, if you want to take it away.
Good morning, everyone. I am joined by Matt Prosser with EPS this morning, and we're both going to kind of tag team on our update for you today. So let me share my screen and we'll jump right in. You guys see that okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so just a quick reminder on our overall timeline. We are closing in on having a draft plan before the end of the year. That will be an internal draft. And so what we're going to focus on today is just to give you guys an update on what we've been hearing from our most recent round of outreach, which just closed yesterday. And we'll talk about some of the preliminary information that we're getting out of that. But we are still very much on track to have a draft to you guys for internal review in December. And then we're shooting to have that public draft released early in next year. So we'll talk more about that as we go along. In terms of our input opportunities, these are continuing to go up in terms of kind of overall opportunities as well as participation. We ended up with pretty tremendous response, I think, to both our in-person meetings and our online survey. I just closed this morning and we were one shy of 450 on our in-person our online responses. And we had, I think, around 330 folks who participated in the public meeting. So we haven't updated the actual comment piece of this yet, but I think I'm feeling pretty good in terms of having a lot of information to work with as we get into the draft plan. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Matt is going to jump in and give you guys just some high level feedback. I think we will be in the process. We have kind of preliminary numbers broken out by planning area. What we were going to focus on today is just to give you kind of a high level sense of where the rolled up responses look like on the different issues that we've been asking about, just to give you a sense of kind of where things are headed. In some cases, we have really clear guidance at a planning area level, less so at a county-wide. And so there's still a lot of information that we need to sort through this week to try to get a better handle on exactly what the recommendations will be for the plan in each area. So we are not going to delve into that today, just to try to give you a sense of where we stand at this point. So I'll let Matt jump in and then we can circle back. And the second piece of what we want to talk about today is going to be the preliminary annotated outline for the plan and kind of where we're headed with that. So I'll turn it over to Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Darcy. So Darcy talked about the pretty robust response we've had to both the in-person meetings as well as the online survey, and we're still working through those results. So what we're presenting is really sort of the county-wide results. So we, as you know, within our meetings, we've asked about 6 key topics here: growth management, agriculture, wildlife, renewable energy and utilities, housing and economic development. really getting a sense of, we're giving a presentation of, what we've heard to date, where we are currently with policies, but really trying to get a sense of what direction the community wants to go in terms of these topics. And so, as you probably saw, we use sort of the scale of limited, moderate, and proactive in terms of how to approach each of the topics. So for the first topic, the first chunk of topics were really around sort of growth management and conservation. And so we asked about, what approach should the county take in terms of growth management, agricultural preservation, and wildlife habitat preservation. And really, it seems to be pretty strong support for at least a moderate, if not a proactive approach on addressing these. There are some exceptions. A couple of the planning areas desired a little more limited of approach, so we'll be factoring that in terms of the planning area policies. And usually those were areas that had larger lot minimums, so not necessarily feeling the same pressures that other areas are, but generally a pretty sound support for a more proactive approach to those areas. In terms of large-scale wind and solar and communication towers, even more support for being proactive in providing guidance and regulation about where and how these types of facilities are located within the county. I would say they're a little bit less sort of proactive support related to communication towers, but still, this topic probably had the most clear direction in terms of the desire for one direction over the other. Next slide. We talked about housing. So first, kind of how proactive should the county be in terms of allowing for housing diversity, sort of a mixed response, although more support towards at least a moderate or proactive approach. Then we also asked about short-term rentals, and as you guys know from your history, there's some split opinions about short-term rentals, but we did find a little more support for at least the county doing something more than they are currently to address short-term rentals. Next slide. And the last, I forgot about this slide. And then we kind of dove a little bit deeper into what the county could do potentially to address housing needs, to get a sense of, what types of tools the people in the community might be open to. And really, this idea of partnering with municipalities and trying to address those needs collectively and targeting certain housing types was the most supported, although that there was a fair amount of support for trying multiple things, even investing county funds. And then things like requiring a special district for larger, denser subdivisions. And so what we'll do in the plan policies is start to lay out what we think sort of approach could be based on the feedback and allow the community to react to that from there. Next slide. We did ask about looking into the cost benefits of adopting a uniform building code. Really pretty split yes, no response, and it was pretty close. There were a couple areas that were definitely in favor, like Batitsi and Sunlight, but the other areas more pretty evenly split. Pretty interesting. So still working on what direction we'll take that. And then lastly, we talked about sort of economic development, tourism topics. So question about how permissive we should be with commercial businesses, requiring and maintaining public land access, and then lastly, promoting outdoor recreation options. And so in terms of commercial businesses, a pretty split opinions, although seems to be a little more support for some allowances for commercial in certain areas. And so a nuanced approach to that. And definitely considering the planning area preferences will be likely where we head in that direction. In terms of public land, that was definitely something people value and wanting to see more of a proactive, whether it's moderate or fully proactive in terms of making sure we at least maintain public land access. And then outdoor recreation, little less support for sort of trying to robustly build that out in certain plan areas. Enjoying the access to public lands, but not needing to necessarily drive additional tourist amenities in certain areas was sort of the reaction that we received in terms of that topic. And then, yeah, we'll have the complete summary coming soon, which will include both countywide information, but really those responses by planning areas, and also those open-end comments, so we can find some unique perspectives and interesting ideas. So look out for that, and that'll help sort of paint the full picture of how the community was feeling about the direction we're headed.
And I guess a couple more things to add to that. You may recall at the public meetings, we had a series of boards that staff was manning to ask for specific detail, kind of feedback on different uses by planning area. And so we got a bunch of comments on that at the meetings, but also our LUPAC members, many of them took those boards out to different events and activities in their community. And so we're starting to get some of those back from our LUPAC members. And so we're compiling that information as well, which is really what, as Matt mentioned, is going to kind of help us, interpret and get a better sense of what the individual planning areas are looking for in terms of those allowances. That provides quite a bit more detail. And then I guess the other thing I would kind of tee up, this is early information and, kind of not a complete response, but I think, in areas where I think by and large, we have enough information, we feel like, to provide some options, as Matt said, in terms of how to move forward, whether it's, countywide or in individual planning areas. I think the one exception of the question where we're scratching our heads a little bit and, could use some input if you have it today, or something you guys can think about and kind of get back to us on. But I think the building code question certainly is one that has been pretty split all along. It's something that's reflected in your 98 plan. We heard it early on, which is why we were asking the question, but, not getting a lot of clear guidance on that. So I'd be curious if there are any initial reactions or guidance that you all want to provide as we kind of move into this next stage on that issue, or if you want to kind of wait and see how the full results shake out.
Personally, I guess I'd like to see how the results shake out. I know we've had some preliminary discussions about what it would take to put that type of process in place. As far as the county is concerned, somewhat the personnel that would be involved, the cost that might be involved, and those kinds of things. But I'm not sure we're ready to go into that yet until we find out what the public really wants us to look at.
Sounds good. Are there other questions or things that jumped out at you guys that you want to dig into a little bit deeper on any of these topics and the preliminary results that we've run through?
Commissioner Teal?
Darcy, Commissioner Teal. My question is, I'm trying to see how this is going forward. We'll have the draft land use plan coming up shortly. Will it include a complete summary as part of it, or part of the draft plan? I mean, my question is it county? Are we going to be looking at a land use plan that is countywide or broke down to the planning areas?
Great question. And that is something we're going to talk more about with the annotated outline. So we're going to address countywide issues, and we're going to address planning area specific issues. So there will be policy guidance at both levels. And so we'll talk more about that when we get into the outline. But I think what part of your question is sort of, will we have this information available, at both levels? We stuck to countywide today just because we need more time to process that at a planning area level, make sure we've got everything folded in. But the summary that we're working on for this round of outreach does have information broken out both ways. So any open-ended comments that we got from someone in Clark or in Cody Local will be organized as such. So we will have the data available in both ways. And that's really what we're going to rely on to kind of help inform the policy direction that comes forward in the draft plan. So all of those public input summaries will be included in the appendix of the plan. That's going to end up being, it already is a couple hundred pages worth. I think this is going to add quite a bit more. So there's a lot of food for thought there, but I think we've really worked hard, I think, to try to document all the input that we've received in as many ways as we can make it make sense, and that we need to really inform the process.
Yeah, well, thank you. That will help. Well, my concern is, 4, 6, or God forbid, 20 years from now, when the next round of commissioners are trying to analyze what was meant in the 98 plan, or say the 2022 plan, that it's not, because we have very different areas, as
Yeah.
you've seen. And so as they make those decisions, I think the specifics in those areas are going to be imperative to the plan to distinguish the differences when decisions are being made.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that, the issues that we have focused on in this round of outreach are really the ones that, we've heard from folks countywide are important. But as you said, and we saw, how people interpret those issues based on where they live in the county is very different. And so we'll talk about things broadly, but we'll also drill down so we can really capture those nuances.
Okay.
Commissioner Tilden?
Yeah, Joe Tilden. Just a quick question, and I'm not sure what kind of answer you give me, so we'll see. My question is, I guess I'm wondering, the people that you've talked to and the comments that you've gotten, it's very apparent from what you showed us today that the majority of people want to be very proactive when it comes to development. And my concern is, when you want to protect wildlife, that's great. You want to protect open space, you want to protect agricultural land, that's great. But I guess my ultimate question is, do the people really realize what potential is to their private property rights when you start protecting these areas and get extremely proactive on development? Do you think they have a feel for that?
I think that there is they need more information they need to see what the actual recommendations would be that associate with those issues. And then they can have a more, dialed in response in terms of what that means for them. I think generally people are supportive of those ideas, as you said. But I think when we get to the draft plan and the specific recommendations, that will then be a question of, okay, now I understand what this might mean in my area of Park County, and do I feel differently? Some people may feel the same, some people may change their perspective. And so I think that's part of the process where the rubber really meets the road in terms of, how strongly do we feel? And we've been asking that question, but I think as you're implying, there probably definitely are some folks who aren't quite sure what that means yet. So they may have responded with a tentatively, I think I want to move in this direction, but I'm going to, kind of hold my final answer until I see what the actual recommendations are. So that's part of the process, of kind of exploring things from a really high level of, what do you care about to, what does it actually mean to you and your property? And, I think people are just going to have to review the recommendations and think about those issues when they have those additional specifics. And if it changes their perspective, that's why we go through this process, is to kind of build that understanding and kind of ultimately have direction from folks based on, kind of tangible recommendations. So I don't know if that got it specifically what you were asking for, but probably won't too much.
It does. I mean, in my experience, people can be all in favor of something until it affects them directly. And I'm afraid that we're headed in that direction.
I think, Darcy, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's part of the discussion that we will have in the end of January, first part of February public meetings when we go over this plan as to what the recommendations are. And I think we need to be clear on what recommendations that we have in there of how it will affect individual properties, as long as we're clear with that and they have the opportunity to come in and tell us whether we're headed in the right direction or not before we put this into play.
Yep, that is absolutely true. And in some cases, we have pretty clear direction coming out of this round of outreach, I think, to provide, kind of a very responsive recommendation based on what we've heard in some planning areas. And so in some cases, I think it's going to be more straightforward. I think others are going to be trickier. I mean, the areas Matt kind of alluded to in one of his overviews that, responses really varied based on kind of how much pressure people are feeling now from development. You know, how much are they seeing around them? How concerned are they about, you know, how future growth will impact them directly? And so the folks who maybe are less concerned seem to be, you know, feel a little bit more buffered from it, I think. But the people who are being impacted on it in a very, you know, direct way and a very visible way have a different, you know, kind of a heightened level of concern. And so, you know, those are the things we're going to have to work through. And so I think some areas it's probably going to be fairly straightforward of, you know, we like what we have and, you know, we don't really want to see, you know, any changes to the rules or our direction. We feel how we did in 98 and that's fine. In other cases, I think people have realized that maybe we feel the same way we felt in 98, but things are changing around us and we don't really have control of it. And so we'd like to at least consider what, you know, what options we have on the table. And those are going to be the tougher conversations of, you know, if we go this route, it might impact certain people this way. If we go this route, you know, it's sort of that whole trade-offs question that we've been wrestling with. And, you know, where do folks feel most comfortable moving forward in different areas?
Okay. Commissioner Mangle?
Darcy, do you, as we get closer to the end, do you expect maybe a flurry of landowners trying to beat the deadline and trying to get ahead of all of this? In the past, have you seen that happen?
Not really. I think, you know, I think it's going to depend on what the recommendations are. So again, this is the policy foundation for future changes to the regulations. And so people will have a sense of where the county wants to go. You know, but we can't answer that. I think I have not seen that happen. Matt, I don't know if you've seen that happen in any of.
No, I mean, I think you tend to get more parcel specific questions once we kind of get a draft plan and map out. That's always happens. I don't think at a comp plan level, we typically see a rush of development applications or rezoning requests or anything like that. So no, but it's good. It usually, when we have a draft plan out, it spurs some people to action, which is great because we need them to participate. So yeah.
Well, and I wonder if that wouldn't happen more in the case of updated regulation proposals as we actually start to put the regs into play, that there may be a little bit more concern.
Yes.
Okay.
And that starts to be a different level of outreach as well, where, you know, you are kind of being more direct in sort of engaging the folks who will be impacted directly by certain things most times. And so it changes the conversation for sure. But I think, you know, we've definitely seen more folks, you know, kind of sit up and take notice this go around, thanks to, you know, kind of folks pushing the word out and our LUPAC getting the word out. But, you know, I think we'll kind of see how whether that carries through to January. And from here, I suspect it probably will based on what we've seen.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been really great feedback for this point in the plan. I think we had a pretty robust response, which is really helpful.
Any other questions right now from the commissioners? Okay.
All right, so we will shift gears then and jump into kind of how we're going to put this thing together. And so what we had sent to you all yesterday was a working draft, what we're calling an annotated outline of the updated land use plan. And what we were hoping to do today is just kind of walk through this high level. You know, the purpose of doing this is to make sure folks have a good sense of, you know, what to expect in the draft plan. You know, if there's something that you are specifically looking for, you know, kind of where does that fit? You know, is there something we're missing? So this gives us a chance to kind of run this by you, by staff, the LUPAC and our technical working group, just so that we're all kind of moving in the same direction. And when you get the draft plan in December, it is somewhat familiar to you in terms of what you were expecting. And so I'll just kind of quickly run through some of the background chapters. We're going to spend more time on the land use discussion. But I think in terms of the introductory section, this is, we get a lot of questions from folks about, why does the county do this? Is the county allowed to do this? How does this all work? And so this chapter is really meant to just sort of, establish those parameters for, where the county gets its authority to plan, why we do this. One of the things that we are planning to bring forward and kind of update from the 98 plan is there is a pretty detailed history of land use planning in Park County, which, maybe more than some people care to know or want to know, but I think it's really valuable for folks to understand, kind of how this all came about and what the evolution has been. And so we're going to roll that forward and kind of simplify that into sort of a timeline so that is documented for future folks as well. And then we'll talk a fair bit about just sort of, provide an overview of the process and, kind of what came out of that. And, I think a lot of this is, kind of executive summary level detail. Back to Commissioner Teal's question earlier, we'll talk about the process here, but there are going to be multiple documents attached, as appendices to the plan that contain all of the detailed feedback that we've received. One of the other thoughts we had just in hearing some of the questions that we've had and you all have had is that it might be helpful in this introductory section to kind of have a little bit of a, how to use the plan section based on whether you're a property owner, you're a, business owner, or developer, et cetera, in terms of, where do I find what I'm looking for? What types of information do I need based on, kind of what I might be planning to use the plan for. So that's something that we'll weave into this section as well. And I think, also going back to our early meetings, we've made it clear, I think all along, or tried to, that there really is a strong connection in this plan to the 1998 plan in terms of what people care about and, kind of how that relates. And so we want to reinforce that up front, that this is, yes, it's a new plan, but there are a lot of pieces that are going to be reflected from that early work as well. And feel free to stop me if you have questions on any of the individual sections. Otherwise, we'll keep rolling and circle back at the end. Chapter 2.
Real quick, Darcy.
Yeah, go ahead.
Commissioner Teal, before I forget, because if you get too far into this, I'll forget where my chain of thought was. But my question, as you're analyzing a lot of this data from the different areas, have you or will you look at possibility of changing some of these planning areas, combining them, adding more, simplifying, anything like that? Are we looking at the responses in any of them being similar enough that they could be combined, or big differences within those areas? And any recommendations at this point, or will that be done later, or is it being done at all?
That question has kind of been on the table from the beginning and was something that was flagged early on. We have been kind of keeping an eye out for those indications. I don't know that we have seen kind of a clear, direction for that yet, other than to say that people really seem to identify with these planning areas and, kind of that is their community within the county. And so I think we are, cautious about respecting that, established foundation that you have. And, at this point, don't have specific recommendations on that. We may, but I think we'll try to, if there are, it would be a pretty light touch in terms of, trying to change those. I think we've really organized the process around a lot of those. And, there's a lot of data that's been crunched in those areas to kind of reflect what's happening. So we are thinking about that, but I think at this point we haven't seen sort of major indications that would be something that would be necessary, but we're certainly open to discussing that.
With that, would that come as part of the plan, or would that actually come into as part of the regulation development later?
Good question. I think if you were going to make any changes that you'd want to do it at the plan level, since that's really meant to, tie in pretty closely to your regulations. As of right now, I'm not aware that your regulations really, other than they are not aligned with the planning areas in the same way, as the plan is, unless I'm missing something.
Okay,
Except for a few kind of plan area specific zone districts would be the only,
True. Yeah, no, that's true, Matt. Thank you.
yeah.
I think Joy wanted to weigh in for a second on that one.
Yeah, so I absolutely will be proposing some changes, in particular to the more like the Cody local, Sage Creek, mostly the near municipality planning areas. And I think Matisse might see a change there possibly too, but I definitely think there's been some density changes on the fringes of some of those planning areas that make them not belong in the more rural planning area now. They belong more in the city local type places. So that will be something I'll be watching as we go through. And I think we're going to see that in the land suitability analysis in the areas where we identify current versus future use.
Okay.
I think it's going to fall out when we look at that stuff.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Darcy.
Okay. So chapter 2 is where the countywide policy direction will live. And so this really goes back to the materials that we presented and kind of rolled out to the community in June. So the vision, the values, the countywide goals. And so we have been working to add in policy direction. We paused on that over the summer while we were waiting for this round of outreach, but we have some preliminary direction from that June outreach. This is really where those things that apply countywide will live. And so this will be kind of a place to go if people are interested to know, kind of what's the county's position on a particular issue. We may make some adjustments to the different topics that are addressed beneath the values. All of this is going to sort of evolve over the next month. But this will be kind of a big chunk of the plan in terms of policy guidance. One of the questions we had was, thinking about, kind of future looking. This section very much is going to talk about what are the trends, what are the pieces that really are influencing, that are potentially threatening some of these values, or people feel are threatening these values, influencing where we want to go. But very much the goals and the policies are focused on, how do we want these things to change in the future? So a lot of those issues that we've been talking about will be addressed in this section from that broad perspective. One of the other things we've heard throughout the process is that, there is a lack of understanding, or, kind of general need for more information just about how do things work in Park County, who does what, who do I go to for different questions if I'm new or I'm not familiar with, certain issues. And so particularly coming out of the original initial stakeholder interviews we did back in February, we got a lot of great information, a lot of foundational pieces that we will be weaving into this section. So there will be kind of little blurbs and sidebars to kind of explain to folks, background information about different topics. So just to kind of make it as informational as possible. So it is going to be a policy guide, something that you guys use day to day. But, it's also something that should be informational and helpful for folks who just need to get up to speed on, kind of different issues in the county. Any questions on this section?
I think we're good.
Okay. All right. Chapter 3 is the countywide growth framework. And so this is where, kind of the land use issues really kind of take shape in terms of the map. And so we want to spend a little bit more time on this. We are proposing a slightly different approach than you have in your current plan, but this is really the main tool that will be used to kind of guide future growth and also inform the zoning changes or regulation changes that come out of that, along with the planning area stuff. So starting with what you have, for those who maybe aren't familiar with the 98 plan or haven't looked at it in a while, the land use map, and there are some, but most comp plans or land use plans have a future land use map of some sort. And your 1998 plan has a suitability categories map. And there are 5 different categories that are really based on the intensity of uses that are suitable in different parts of the county. And you recall from our updates earlier this summer and working with Brian, we have done a suitability analysis countywide. We have that information. We're going to be weaving that into our conversation. But we do not see that as sort of the end goal in terms of the map. And so the intensity classifications in your current plan range from urban to conservation, with several flavors of rural in there. You do have an ag district overlay, which we talked about extensively over the last month in our meetings, in that, this was an overlay that was developed. We don't really have documentation of how it was developed or why it doesn't align with a lot of the irrigated ag lands that we have. So we know that there's some gaps there. And we also have found that, kind of having these kind of rounded edges, more generalized blobs on a map makes it a little bit tougher to administer. So those blobs don't really follow parcel lines or kind of logical boundaries. And so it's just a different level of kind of generalization that makes it trickier to use, whether it's you guys, staff, or the property owners. And so you can see on the maps, for example, in the lower right, the Powell blob there around the city, showing some of the high rural areas or urban areas. And so what we are proposing as a kind of next iteration of this is to go to more of a future land use map approach. And so we would have similarly a set of categories, which I'll talk through here in a moment, but we would get into a fair bit more detail in terms of trying to describe what the intended future is, not just what's suitable, but what do we actually want to see in these areas in the future based on what we've heard from the community. So it's going to be a more forward-looking map in terms of, creating that big picture view of how land use might change or not in different parts of Park County over time. So we'll get into primary and supporting uses, density, lot sizes, defining characteristics, all those things that kind of help inform future review of proposals. So we'll get those generally established in this chapter. And then going back to where we were earlier, we will have supplemental guidance at the planning area level. So if we have an area that's defined as rural, for example, on the countywide map, there will be additional specifics about, what does that mean beyond our general description to an area like Clark or the North Fork. And we can get into that more detailed policy guidance. One of the other proposed shifts that we're exploring is that we think assigning the land use categories at a parcel level, we wouldn't show the parcels on the map, we would show them at a more generalized level. But having that really helps you maintain the integrity of your data over time. So you're not having to split parcels. So if things change, it's an easier way to manage. It's also more intuitive, as I said, in terms of helping people understand, how does this affect me? And what does it mean for my particular area? We will be using the suitability analysis to kind of assign a score to each of those parcels. And so we'll have that additional level of using that as a cross check. So if, we have areas that are assigned an urban land use category, but they're assigned a low suitability score, then we have a problem. And so, it's just another cross check that can be used as we develop the map, but also after the plan's adopted and things are being reviewed. So there's kind of two groups of categories, and the names may change. These are just ideas right now we're going to be working through. But basically two groups, one that defines the rural areas and one that, kind of gets at developed or developing areas. So where are the areas we're likely to see additional growth in the future based on what's there today or suitability, variety of things. And so you can see the rural areas include things like agriculture, ranch and rangeland, rural communities, places like Wapiti, Clark, Ralston. And so we've talked as a team with our staff group, kind of conceptually, what does that mean? When we talk about the rural communities, we think it's important to, call those out and acknowledge that there are mixes of uses in those different areas and kind of use that as a way to address what we're hearing from those communities. We don't think in most cases that's going to mean drawing a boundary around anything. A lot of those areas don't have a clear boundary, but at least in name, we want to acknowledge that, at the intersection of X and X or along this particular stretch of the river or whatever it is, that there is a community there. It is not just rural, for as far as the eye can see. So that's sort of a to be determined, but something that we think is important based on what we've been hearing. And then we also think it's important to include a category of resource management / recreation. And this would essentially be all the state and federal lands, all those areas that we have, kind of described in our initial overview of the growth considerations as, prohibitive. And essentially that just means, doesn't mean nothing's going to happen in those areas. In most cases it won't. But we want people to understand and have that context for make it very clear that yes, this property abuts federal land or state land, and what are the policy implications of that. So it's more of a contextual category than anything that would then also tie to your natural resource management plan. Developed and developing areas, I think these will capture the general sense, but will probably evolve as the map comes together as well. We are envisioning a rural residential category, and potentially that, the policy guidance for a category like that would vary based on, how close you are to an incorporated city or town or, that sort of thing. So there may be some variations within that. Probably an urban residential category. So those areas that are likely to be annexed in the future, or, the desire is to kind of encourage them to be annexed, commercial and industrial. And so the latter two categories in particular, we were looking at, areas that the county already has zoned for those types of uses. We'll see based on the feedback coming out of this round of outreach, whether there is much desire to look at new areas, but at minimum, we feel like we need to capture those areas that are already seeing that development or already zoned for that development. Questions on those two categories before we move forward?
Anything? I think we're okay.
Okay. And then lying on top of those land use categories, we are imagining that there will be a series of different types of overlays. And the two categories here, priority conservation areas, would really reflect what we've been talking about through the process so far. An updated ag overlay, potentially a multi-species habitat overlay if that moves forward. Conservation easements, just where they exist. That's something that we have in our database already. And then floodplain and wetlands. And some of these things you already show on your zoning map, but not necessarily on the land use map. So those would be areas that we can then tie to different policy guidance. So if you're in the North Fork area and you're within a multi-species habitat overlay, there might be some additional guidance and whatnot. And then the last piece is what we're calling coordinated planning areas. And we heard early in the process, a desire from the incorporated areas to work with the county on, kind of figuring out what happens in those areas, kind of that urban rural interface. And so there is some guidance in the master plans for the incorporated areas already. And so we're looking to build on that guidance. We also want to, continue those conversations to kind of identify areas where it does make sense from your perspective, from their perspective, to kind of work collaboratively on, encouraging some of that higher density growth close to the cities. In some cases, as I just mentioned, you have zoning in place already. The question will be, what else needs to happen? Are there other areas that folks want to include? And so those are pieces that will be woven into the policy discussion as well. Questions on any of that?
Just one. I know on the floodplain, we get that from the feds. It's published, and I know Joy and our staff are trained in that, but I'm not sure about wetlands. How is that considered, and where does that information come from as far as an overlay?
And Joy, I'm going to let you speak to that one, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have the National Wetlands Inventory that is, that's a public data layer that's produced by the federal government.
Okay.
The problem, and I mentioned this to Darcy, we have the wetlands layer. How accurate it is of course a question. We actually have a wetland in question right now that I reached out to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife on, but there are special rules for development in wetlands that are beyond us, but we can't ignore them. And so as part of floodplain development, we also have to address wetlands. It's part of our requirement. So we just can't ignore them.
Okay, thank you.
And something I wanted to mention, Darcy, that I haven't mentioned yet, but I've been thinking about, the wildland urban interface are called WUIs. Often looked at for fire prevention and especially wildfire prevention. I'm not sure if that's something we might want to look at in some of the more forested or near forest areas for special attention. I know in the past, the regulations would require people to have defensible space around their property, to make sure that you wouldn't start a fire around your home and then of course start a forest fire. That's just something I've been kind of thinking about lately. I'm not sure if or how it would fit into this plan, but I just want to put it out there.
So that's a great point, Joy. We have generally not on the future land use map, but we have been including more and more the WUI layer in comp plans, typically with the hazard mitigation policies. So maybe there's a supplemental map in that area that identifies those areas. You do have your regional hazard mitigation plan, multi-hazard mitigation plan. So we can talk more about, what that might be, but at very minimum, kind of the goal of including that is just to increase awareness and make sure people know, kind of what resources are available to kind of help them figure out how to manage those issues on their own property if they choose to do that.
Anything else right now from the commissioners? I think we're good.
All right. Chapter 4 is where the planning area policy statements will come in. So for each of the planning areas, we'll have a separate section here. And, I think the goal is to make these pretty, standalone really, so that if someone comes in and is interested in doing something in the Cody local area, staff can kind of pull out that section of the plan, say you also need to look at these sections, but there's a, kind of a snapshot of information about that area, what the issues are, kind of what the trends have been, what the development, forecast is for that area. and then the land use guidelines. And so there should be, kind of a self-contained bit of guidance about each of those areas. And so this is where we will really be looking for folks, our LUPAC, as well as the community members, to take a look at, what what the description is of their area, kind of what the guidelines are for this area, and to kind of tell us, have we gotten it right? Or are we missing something? And so, I think right now in the 98 plan, it's a pretty involved, at least, from an outsider's perspective, trying to go in and kind of understand the letter keys on the map and then go find where that is. And so you have to kind of go through a lot of different hoops to figure out what the direction is in some cases. And so our hope is that this will be a fairly user-friendly approach that, makes it easy for people to kind of understand not just what they can do with their property, but also understand what their neighbor can do with their property, so that, that you have less surprises, or at least have a, place to point people if they are surprised about, where did this come from? Why are we allowing this in this particular location? That it, kind of comes back to this section of the plan as that foundation.
Okay, anything there? We're okay?
All right. And then our last section is implementation. And this is, kind of, I think, the most fluid at this point, just given we don't know exactly where we're going with all of these things yet. But I think what we are envisioning is, probably a set of priority initiatives that really focus on, what are the things that we really need to do in the next 1 to 3 years to help implement the plan. We've been telling folks all along that, the buck doesn't stop with the plan. The plan is a policy guide. What do we need to do to actually put that into place? And so, it could involve specific recommendations for, new regulations or updated regulations, additional guidance on conservation tools, agreements. Those are the types of things that we would envision, coming out of the conversations that we've been having with you all and with the community. And so it's just a question of, what those recommendations are and kind of how they shake out. But, most of the time, I think part of this is going to be to, really identifying kind of things that the county will do on its own or wants to do on its own, and things that the county is going to do in collaboration with others. And a lot of times it's the with others part of it. And so there's a lot of things that happen through partnerships. And so this section would kind of lay out all those pieces and kind of some next steps for the plan. One thing I would say is that, it's been almost 25 years since you guys did your last major update. I think the goal with a plan like this, yes, it is a 10 to 20 year plan, but in an ideal world, you would be revisiting your implementation chapter with some regularity, and that really depends on how what you're working on and kind of how often it needs to be revisited. But at least every 3 years you should take a look, update that chapter, and kind of add on some new things that have come up. This is really a chance to step back and kind of think about, are we making progress? Do we need to change something if it's not working? So it's meant to be kind of the most living part of the plan. I think, as we've seen from our outreach, a lot of times the big picture vision and goals doesn't change radically over a 10 to 20 year period. It can, but in your case, it hasn't necessarily. And so it may be that those things are fairly, steady, but you're kind of checking in to see if you're making the progress that folks were hoping to make as the plan is implemented. Questions on that?
The one thing that we've added, I guess, in looking at the work here is the GIS data development management practices. And I guess that's one area that is pretty interesting in today's world, with the ability to upgrade that constantly, and something that certainly would look a little different probably in 3 to 5 years from now for the county to use. do you find that other government agencies in the situation that we're in are same type of county work? We have 3 areas that use a lot of GIS, our assessor's office, our public works, and of course, planning. Do they work well at keeping those in layers together as far as a unified picture, or are they separated somewhat? Can you tell me how that works in some other areas so we can get a feel for it?
Yeah, I think this is, I will say this is one of the areas that's most disappointing in the work that we do, because I think it often falls off the radar as soon as the plan is done. And I will say that, you know, the work that Brian has done to kind of get this set up so that you have this interactive portal, everything's in one place, is pretty cutting edge. We have not worked on another plan that has, you know, that exact interface in that way. And it is important once you invest that time to really keep it up to date and, you know, kind of build on that. Because I think what we tend to see is that because it is, you know, often different departments or, you know, staffing changes over time, you lose that thread. And so, you know, it's not uncommon for us to start a plan, you know, 10 years down the road or to get a call from someone that we worked on plan for 10 years ago and say, hey, can you send us that data again? Because we haven't touched it. And literally this has happened multiple times. And you think, oh gosh, we did all this work to kind of get everything cleaned up and ready. But it's easy to lose track of that. And I think it's a super valuable resource. And I think it's really the way that this plan has come together. It's going to be pretty integral in terms of, you know, kind of helping maintain that usability. And it's a heck of a lot easier to kind of do some targeted updates once you've kind of invested the time that you have already and just do, you know, updating one layer at a time instead of having to start from scratch each time you realize, oh gosh, it's been a few years and we probably ought to take a look at that.
Thank you. Anything else right now? Okay.
All right, last piece is just kind of a note that there will be a fair bit of appendices in this plan, ranging from a glossary. We had a lot of folks say, well, define what you mean by this or that. Your current plan has a lot of foundation for that. We'll be working with Joy to kind of sort through that. There will be a kind of a series of what we're calling just briefs in the back. We rolled out the domestic water one. Folks really wanted more, it sounds like, but we'll be packaging the population demographics, et cetera, in the same format so that that information is easy to use and distribute. And then there will be a lot of technical, you know, kind of context here, getting back to the point of we need to make sure we know why these things happened and how they were developed after the plan is adopted. And then Appendix C, which we've talked about today, is really all of the community outreach summaries, which we've, you know, kind of already got started on the website, will be compiled in that last section. And that is all we have on the outline. Are there questions, concerns, things we're missing you're wondering about that you want to make sure we get on our radar as we're moving forward this month?
Anything you can think of right now, commissioners? Commissioner Teal?
Just a question is the process here. So we're going to get a draft here shortly. And what's the timeline again when it goes to the public versus the commissioners looking at it?
Yep. So I'll just run through quickly kind of between now and December and January. So over the next month, we're going to meet again with our LUPAC, the technical working group. We've got that other wildlife considerations workshop. We are going to be releasing the draft, internal draft of the land use plan to you guys and staff, as well as our LUPAC on the 9th of December. We'll have a month basically to get comments back, and then looking to roll out the consolidated draft, the public draft in late January. And so I know that there has been some discussion about some interim meetings in December, and I don't know if the specifics have been worked out yet. And Joy, whether you want to speak to that now?
Are you talking about like for the board to sort of have a workshop to review that plan?
Yep.
Yeah, we're talking about that. Dossie's working with the board to decide when and how they want to roll that out.
We're December 9th, if we have it then. December is pretty pushed for us. We have our normal first meeting, and then we also have WCCA in the second week. And then, of course, we get into the third weekend, Christmas. So I'll work with the board on dates that might come together to at least be able to have a work session with the board in order to have our comments, be able to go back with the staff comments by January 6th.
Sounds great.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't know that there's anything else from our side today.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Darcy.
Thank you. Okay. With that, the commissioners have a break until 9 or 10.
Recording stopped.
Nothing.
Said about to be bad.
Oh. Okay, glad that's not a recorded part. You need to copy that one back.
Which one?
The main easement document.
Ooh.
Spilled a bunch of tea on my lap. So
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah.
How are you, Steve?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Good.
Raising hell anymore.
Damn troublemaker.
That's
Turn on the lights in the back. There's a page that we don't need to on before, but-
Like when meetings end before noon.
Your one on the 6th won't.
Huh?
The next one won't, and the one on the 6th won't. The next one, we have the rest of that law, but migration thing in the afternoon. So. That'll come together.
Could've just put one.
Yeah, that doesn't do much good.
Yeah. Exactly what I said. Did you get my text about putting together a list?
I did, yeah, I talked to Lauren about it. I think the deal that you and Lauren wanna do, be just county people primarily.
Well, I didn't know if you had anyone else.
No, not really.
I mean, Marty.
Well, Marty, of course.
Yeah.
But, Marty was talking about doing a little retirement thing, with social friends.
However you want to do it.
Yeah.
Just, you're gonna have all kinds of people that are glad to see you go.
Oh, exactly. Hell, I'll be drunk for a couple of weeks.
Nothing wrong with that. Except for it hurts more and more nowadays.
Oh, it does. I tell you what, I can't stand the hangovers anymore. Well, I tell you one thing, I don't envy you people making a decision on this land use plan. I can see all kinds.
Yeah,
of
wait a
problems.
second. I think Scott said we might still be not recording, but audio is still going out, he said.
We're muted.
Says we're muted, doesn't it?
Says we're muted anyway.
Well, what we do is we do.
You can go down on it. Unmute. Oh, broadcaster needs to be muted, right? That's okay if
No, they're
they're,
muted.
yeah. No,
Just
we're
the
not.
broadcast.
Just the broadcaster.
Yeah.
That's okay if they're muted. We're not. Yeah. Okay. Okay, if we can get going again, our 10:45 agenda item is County Engineer, Public Works Department, Brian Edwards, to review proposals and consider recommendations for construction contract award, courthouse building, automation system upgrade and integration, HVAC.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just I guess to kind of backtrack a little bit, so we all know we've got some major HVAC issues with the courthouse and courthouse addition and public works buildings. So with our consultant engineering design associates that's been looking at everything and coming up with a plan, we've worked out multiple phases. And so the first phase of the project is the and most critical, in that we're got some things that are on life support now, but it relates to the building automation system, so the control system. So we put together some plans, or engineering design did, and sent out a request for proposals for that first phase of work, which is basically to replace the control systems for the HVAC system. We sent out a request for proposals. I think five companies ended up getting a request for proposals, or ended up requesting them. And then three ended up showing up, three companies to the pre-proposal walkthrough. And then two actually ended up submitting proposals. Those two companies were Long's Controls and D&G Electric. And it was actually D&G was a subcontractor to Basin Mechanical, or Rawhide Mechanical, I'm sorry. And those two submitted proposals. We interviewed both companies last week, the interview team of myself, Trevor with Buildings and Grounds. We've had a couple IT guys sitting in on it, and then Commissioner Mangold sat in on the interviews as well. We had kind of a scoring system, and just kind of let you know some of the things that were discussed. So project-specific approach and philosophy, the ability of professional personnel, past performance, ability to meet time requirements, location and personnel in relation to the project, current projected workload, and proposal quality and completeness. So those were some of the criteria we looked at. In terms of costs, so the base proposal for Rawhide Mechanical, which again is D&G on the controls, and MTI, is $789,895. These are base prices. And then Long Building Systems was $908,575, 0 cents. So then we also had an alternate proposal, which was to not replace the BAV boxes now for some of the individual zones, which if we do that now, there's kind of that danger that they won't work with the updated system. So we may end up spending money that we have to go back and spend again. So we took that part of it out on the alternate price. Rawhide Mechanical submitted a bid of our proposal of $372,986.00. And then Long Building Systems submitted $359,530. So based on that information, we tried not to base it on price alone. Looked at where we're headed and who's got a system and a proposal that best fits the needs of the county moving forward. Looking into the future, it's something that's expandable, that could grow as we add other buildings. So it's kind of a central control system for the building automation system. So staff's recommending that we go with the alternate bid route, alternate proposal price. And we recommend that we select Long Building Services
to do that work, and that's $359,530. I also add that one of the things we asked was like, impacts to staff and department, regular operations. Lowe's had a pretty good proposal there, and had thought through the process. Can do a lot of work after hours, weekends, so that there'll be minimal disruption to staff and departments. In fact, we don't anticipate any relocation of staff for this first phase. But this is just the first phase of something that's going to be a very costly, painful project. But that's our recommendation, to go with Long's at $359,530, and come back, if you award to them, come back next week on a contract.
Madam Chair, just a point from our meetings that both companies did suggest that we go with the alternate bid, and that was their recommendation. So
Yes.
I think it was right of staff. Brian, do you know, you've got this amount, how much, some of them had questions about, especially the buildings and grounds building. Do you expect change orders and such for this amount to change quite a bit?
Well, afterwards, because there was some discussions about the Public Works building, it actually communicates with the controller on the, and at this first phase, there's nothing in the control system for the Public Works building.
Right.
But talking to Long's, they had missed that actually did communicate, but they said for that same price that they would take care of re-coordinating the controls for Public Works. So as of this point, we don't anticipate. I'm sure there's things that you get into that we'll see, but they all did a lot of homework, went through, and actually even came back after the pre-proposal. Both companies did a lot of walkthrough with staff. So I feel like we did the due diligence.
Most of the funds on this, Brian, if I'm not mistaken, are ARP funds that we are
That's right.
using for general expenditures in need of the county.
That's my understanding too.
Okay. Commissioner Teal?
Madam Chair, Brian, I believe I know the answer, but I just want to verify. I know Basin Mechanical is a Park County. Long, they have an office or a shop in Park County as well.
They do have, and in fact, the kind of one of the things we liked about them too is their actual control guy, programmers in PAL. And he's the guy that actually does the computer side
Right.
of it.
So no preference will come into
No
effect as
preference
far as
coming
our
to play for either one of these. And I said Basin, it's actually Rawhide Mechanical. I keep screwing that up.
Right.
We're okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Commissioner?
Madam Chair, I move to accept a proposal from Long Technology based on the recommendation of the interview committee you need a price of $359,530.
Second.
I think Joe got it, so.
Good for you, Joe.
I thought you were done.
Oh, I thought it was too.
Okay, I have a motion and a second to approve the bid from Long Technologies for $359,530 for the controls. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So we will see you next week for contract documents
Next
to
week,
move
I'll
forward.
work with Brian on the contract.
Okay, thank
Thank
you.
you.
For those in attendance, the 11 o'clock is a public hearing, so we cannot start it before 11 o'clock. So we've got a few minute break here. But
Colleen, you might add alternate one. I don't know if they needs to know. It's alternate one in the proposal.
Meeting to the 15th there.
I forgot to say that. I don't
Oh,
think we
yeah,
got to get the
finally,
price.
Carl finally sent one out, if you're getting his email. Hello.
Yeah, but the looks are the same. They're about on the same plane.
you see anything in here? Except I would like you to send them to this part in the afternoon as well.
Yes.
Okay. But it will be sent.
I'll try to be, like, so just depends on how she's.
Okay.
How she's going, she thinks she's gonna be dancing by 2 or 3 days after the surgery.
If you want to call Joyce husband, she's at his last week. Call Joyce husband. He's got his partial last week.
Part of this is complete. Well, not a complete knee, it's a complete revisit.
Read it.
Yeah.
Commissioners, I'll have Molly send out a poll as far as what dates work toward the end of December for you to do that work session for land use plan. Land use plan. Yes.
We were thinking December 20 for the Christmas.
So no, is that our
That's a
meeting?
Tuesday.
That's a Tuesday.
Yeah, it should be fine.
Third Tuesday.
Any ideas?
No. Whew, tight.
Justin?
29th's the only day.
Yeah. Email. I haven't
Guy, it's Pat Stewart.
Oh, no, that's Jeff.
Jeff is the vice chair. Yeah.
It's like saying. Like also like my questions.
Not that I saw his email. He was the chair of that meeting because Pat couldn't attend. And so he just wanted to be sure everybody was on the same page. I believe that none of us felt that way when we left the meeting, that it was scrapped in any way, shape or form. It's just moving it a little bit slower. So that's my understanding. I think that- Oh, maybe, but no, that's not the case. She couldn't be there from a conflict, so. It's fine. I'm not sure where that. Might need to. Get a little.
And put a food scraper outside.
You guys are hungry. Are we close? Yep.
Oh, it's Shalice Garrison, a consultant for the people up in Cook City.
They hired her for something.
Is she an attorney or something? She's a crazy person, right?
How old she is. Oh, wow.
Yeah,
You can have lecture.
there's still one right there, I guess, by the. We need Mallory too. Mallory.
You're presenting it, Joe. You presenting it. Oh, that's right.
Sorry about that, but that's the only seats we got. Yeah. Okay, I think we're close enough to 11 o'clock. We have a public hearing scheduled for Craig Watts open space easement appeal.
Madam Chair, given the fact that I own property that is impacted by this open space easement, I'm going to recuse myself from voting and not attend the meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner Livingston. Is there someone here to present the appeal? If you'd like to, anyone that speaks today, just so I don't have to say this 42 times, if you do comment today, if you will stand and give us your name for the record and speak as loudly as you can. It is being broadcast and they do say that they can't hear our internal discussions once in a while. So I'd like you to use as much voice as you can to help us.
Okay.
So thank you.
I'm Rusty Blau with Morrison, Maryland. Land surveyor that's been hired by the Watts for the development.
Okay.
And I do have, with the appeal, I don't know if you guys got any visual maps of what they plan.
We received historical maps. I don't know that we have a planning map to go with it.
It's all right.
Sure.
It may help clarify what's going on.
Okay. Watch all the cords there, please. It's kind of a trap.
I'll just go around.
I can handle this.
Okay.
Thank you.
And we try to.
No, thank you.
So what is shown on the exhibit that I just handed out was the maximum allowable by zoning and regulation lots. For Craig, we had 4 or 5 acre lots, and then the remainder parcel included the 40 acres of open space, and then was an additional amount to build a residence on. That was when Craig had decided that the property no longer worked for him and wanted to sell it. That was just to give him an idea of what he could do. And he initially thought about those 4 lots. Since then, of looking at the market, what he wants to do as far as density, he only wants to have 3 total lots. So there would be 2 lots plus 1 would be the exempt parcel in the front, because it would include the 40 acres of open space plus some acres behind it to utilize.
So if I understand you correctly, then this plan is no longer what he wants to do.
It's just what's maximum allowable
Okay.
to do. He's just going to only develop 2 of the proposed lots versus 4 of them.
Okay.
And as far as the appeal with the open space easement, there's an existing road that's been named Wagon Trail Road, and that is what Don Gray, he's the owner of the 10 acres that's shown as parcel D on the map. That's his address and what he uses to access the property. And in conversations with Craig, he's expressed no reservation of Craig going ahead with this. And the title company also had given Craig that his address would be coming off of Wagon Trail Road. Wagon Trail Road was an easement that was originally deeded in 2000 when that parcel B was conveyed. The survey for it was done in 1996, but it was not sold until the year 2000. That's when the road had been put in place for the driveway. So, and it is a 60-foot wide. I guess that's a historical background. The open space easement was done in the 80s. get Mr. Keegan here to speak to the legal interpretation of the easement as far as what reservations they have on the easement and what they reserve themselves. Pack Saddle Trail, the original owners that own the entire property. And then they had what reservations they wanted excluded from being developed on the open space, like, and Tom can speak to that. They did not want, you know, the industrial use or off-road vehicle sort of things. They want to keep it for agriculture, ranching, wildlife, the front porch. So, and it did not expressly say no. That's what Tom was going to speak with. That gets beyond my purview, the legal portion of the easement. So.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Keegan?
Madam Chair, members of the board, Tom Keegan on behalf of Mr. Watts. And the piece of the planning director's letter that I'm going to disagree with is that the establishment of wagon trail is a violation of the terms of the open space easement. That's the one on those roads. It's all the way to the right, goes all the way up to that parcel B on that map that you've got there. There's 3 different easements that are cutting across there. As I understand it, only 2 roads, the one that goes up the middle and the one on the right is in our existing roads. Looking at that open space easement, it's paragraph 3 that sets forth the restrictions. And it's paragraph 3 goes on for A, B, C, D, and there's another paragraph under that has A through F. And these are the restrictions. These are the things that are expressly prohibited. Subdivision or de facto subdivision of the property, construction of any homes, mobile homes, etc., except for those structures that you would use to do the purposes, which are agricultural and ranching, which presumably would mean corrals, barns, etc. Use of the property for any commercial or industrial purposes, dumping of any sorts of materials, manipulation of natural streams, any use of off-road vehicles other than for access for the agricultural purposes. Those are the only restrictions in here. And if you look at the easement that is reserved, in paragraph 6, they did reserve 1 easement. Does that mean that you can't do another easement through there? It doesn't say so. That doesn't say it anywhere in here. Does it say there will only be 1 easement? And going back to the whole issue of you know, what when we're talking about restrictions of law, excuse me, restrictions on land, the Wyoming Supreme Court has been very clear that restrictions upon the use of land are not favored and are to be strictly construed. It will not be extended by implication. I think that that's what the conclusion that the planning office came to. By implication, because there was 1 easement that was reserved, by implication, there shouldn't be any more easements. I think you can do this easement. I think this easement can be valid. And in that case in particular, I don't know if we've got any of the county attorneys here. 4B Properties LLC versus Nature Conservancy. It's a 2020 case, Wyoming 24. So, I mean, I think the law is in favor, and I think you can do this. I think you can allow this. This easement's been in place for 22 years. It's paid. There's nothing in that open space easement that says it cannot be done. I think it should be done. It can be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else speaking for the appeal at this point? Okay, this is a public hearing, so I would ask for public comment at this time. If you have comment, if you would please state your name for the record.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Will I have an opportunity to present my side?
If you'd like to do that now, that's fine.
Great. Madam Chair, for those in the room who do not know who I am, I'm the planning director.
and it is my decision that is up for appeal today. I think it's important to look at the full history of this particular instance because that's how I came to my decision. In 1980, the Rhodes approached the Board of County Commissioners on December 17th with the intention of limiting the future use of their land to agriculture, ranching, and wildlife habitat purposes only, and to preserve the land as open space in perpetuity. Perpetuity is important. It means forever. Soon after that meeting, the board agreed to the warranty deed of real property and open space easement. The intention of the grantors was very clear, that the future use and preservation of the land shall be forever honored and defended. Forever. You accepted that as a board. Not you personally, but you as a board. On page, I guess it would be the second page of the open space easement, it does say in consideration of the agreement of the county to forever uphold and maintain the terms and conditions that the grantors have expressed in this instrument. They intended in number 3 on the second page that the open space easements granted and reserved herein shall confine the property to the following uses. Note that it says confine the property to the following uses. The right to use the land for agricultural, ranching, and wildlife habitat purposes only. It doesn't say for residential. It doesn't say for transportation. It says ag, wildlife, and ranching. Further, it says the right to construct, maintain, and repair any improvements reasonably necessary for ag and ranching purposes. The right to enforce the rights herein granted and to prohibit and enjoin any activity or use of the property, which is a violation of the open space easement. Again, the enforcement ability given to you and the grantor. The right of the owner of the appurtenant land at all reasonable times to enter upon the land to inspect, to determine if any violation is in progress. On the following page, which Mr. Keegan pointed out, it talks about the grantor's intent to establish the following uses and practices as prohibited. The part that he did not read is that this list is recognized as not exhaustive and inclusive, which means there could be more things. He did read the fact that subdivision or de facto subdivision of the property or any lot split is part of that prohibition. What you may not recognize is that this land has already been split. These properties that exist right now were a subdivision of the open space. So while we're not here to argue whether those are legal lots or not, I would argue right now that the creation of the 4 lots that are in place right now were in violation of the open space by this very agreement. If you turn to page 5, which is recording number 56-42, page 42, that's where the grantors have reserved exclusively to themselves, their successors and assigns a perpetual right-of-way easement for ingress and egress from the highway to the grantor's property lying northerly of the property being conveyed herein, which easement shall be for the road and ditches presently existing on the grantor's property and whose center line is located on a particular boundary line between the southeast quarter and southwest quarter, as stated in this agreement. Very clearly says the easement not to exceed 20 feet on either side from center line. They didn't say the road, they said the easement shall not exceed 20 feet on either side of center line. Nowhere in this document does it say that additional easements or traffic or residential development would be allowed. In fact, it says what can be allowed, and it only can be allowed: ag, wildlife, and ranching. So when Mr. Watts approached me with the intent of subdividing land, which is not in the open space easement, but north of the open space easement, obviously I had difficulty trying to decide, well, how do we get to the subdivision? So there's 2 roads that are in question. There's Pack Saddle Trail, which is the road that this easement calls out for. It wasn't named at the time, but it has been named Pack Saddle Trail at some point since that time. And then there's the second road in question, which is Wagon Trail. So right now, the property has legal access by Pack Saddle. So Pack Saddle is how you would originally access this property. So it has legal access that way. Later, and again, remember the easement was approved in 1980. But in 2000, Mr. It was Mr. Watts, not Mr. Watts, Mr. Wells. Mr. Wells, in 2000, Mr. Wells provided an easement, which we're referring to as the wagon trail road space right now. He granted that easement. And I would argue that granting that easement was a violation of the open space easement because you're producing a road which was not allowable by the open space easement. There were other easements that had also been granted in addition to Wagon Trail. There was also an easement to the west of Pack Saddle, which was subsequently vacated and moved. But again, it also would have been in violation of the open space easement agreement, but it was vacated. And the part that it was moved to, ironically, is actually on top of the west side of Pack Saddle Trail, which would have increased that easement to 60 feet, which of course is clearly in violation of the open space easement, which restricted it to 20 feet. So there's just been a lot of easement activity going on after the property left the hands of the Rhodeses. And I think we need to talk about what happened there. In 1986, we see signs that Mr. Rhodes had passed away. His estate was moved over to Elaine, his wife. And then in 1989, Mrs. Rhodes passed away. Well, magically in 1994, by means that we are not aware, a deed shows up from Mr. and Mrs. Rhodes, who were dead, to King's Ranch. I don't know if that's legal. I've talked to title about it, but I don't have a legal opinion on that. But in any case, the land was transferred from Rhodes to King's Ranch. And in that deed, it specifically reserved the right to grant open space easement at a later date. And it reserved this, it mentioned this open space easement that was already in place. Just a year later, not even a year later, King's Ranch then starts to deed the land and remove the open space easement discussion from the picture. So it just disappears from the deeds moving forward. And then, of course, we start the breaking up of the land at that point into 4 parcels and other things going on. So again, it seems very clear to me. The Rhodeses went the extra mile to come to this board and say, we understand that the county, as part of your land use plan, wants to preserve open space and protect wildlife. We do too. And in fact, we're so passionate about it that we're going to give you this open space easement to protect for us. Now, it doesn't matter if they died 3 minutes after they signed that, or 3 minutes after they recorded it, or 3 years or 30 years after that. It was very clear what their intent was. So when it comes to this appeal, mentioning that, well, you know, it was just 5 years after the agreement that the Wattses or the Wellses died, or the Rhodeses died. That's irrelevant. It could have been 3 minutes after they signed it. They made their intention very clear. I'm going to honor the Rhodes' intention by keeping this open space open. And I believe roads bring traffic, and traffic is averse to wildlife. So that's part of my decision. And if Mr. Watts wanted to subdivide the property north of the open space, he would require additional road space to do so as part of our rule. And I think the open space agreement does not allow for that. So that's my argument.
Madam Chair.
Yes,
Can I have one quick question? In 2000, when Wagon Trail Road was established, was that ever called into question at that time? Because
not that I'm aware of. I actually, Madam Chair, I actually asked the county engineer if they had any history of that road, and he was unable to find any.
Okay.
So nobody really quite knows. I mean, it's a private road, so it wouldn't have been really in the county's
Yeah, I
purview.
mean, they wouldn't have, yeah. I totally understand that, but from everything I read, establishment of that road is a violation of the open space agreement. Should never happen.
Isn't there a clause, or if I read our homework correctly, I believe there's a clause that anything that was to happen or proposed to happen in that open space agreement was to be brought to the Board of County Commissioners informationally, or however you want to put it, before it was done. And I don't know that we have any record of that, of the proposal for Wagon Trail coming in here before it was built. Do you have any record of that?
I have not seen any record. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but we haven't found any record.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
You want to go now, or do you want to go with after public comment, or? Okay, let's do some public comment here first. Yes, sir.
My name is Sox Freeman. I've been an attorney in Cody for years. I represented Willard Rose. I'm the one that drafted the easement. So I can certainly give you some history if you want. This is 40 years ago. So.
Well, you said history.
Willard was a friend of the family. And when Carson subdivision went in, there was concerns in Wapiti Valley that there was going to be all kinds of breakup of the valley. So the planning and zoning or other organizations through the commissioners were looking at reducing or limiting lots in the rest of the valley to 40 acres, which Willard was in support of. But there was so much pressure brought that, hey, we can do what we want with our property, allow us to just at least get 5-acre lots, which he called 5-acre horse corrals. But so he saw the handwriting on the wall. So it was gonna be really hard for the commissioners to go with 40-acre lots. And he had that property and he loved it. So he decided to take, I guess, basically the southern 2/3, draw a line, turn that into a scenic easement. And that was to remain agriculture for one purpose and one purpose only. The people would drive the valley, stay the agricultural land, and still have a view of the mountains above. And if people wanted to build homes, they could build homes along the river. And at the point, he had that acreage, and he had a road down the middle that went to his house, a little blue metal building right on the river you could hardly see. And that was his home. And so I think that's your saddle, whatever we call it now. That was the main road. That split that property right down the middle. So we put together the easement. He didn't want to go with Nature Conservancy, but anything else. He was what I would call a very conservative Republican. So he wanted to keep it within the county. So we decided, because I had worked with Charlie Kepler on doing the same thing in Jackson, that we would deed a small parcel of that property to the county. So you had adjacent land, and then give you, because he trusted the commissioners. I think he was a commissioner for 2 terms. He trusted the commission to do their job, but that's why the language is in there. Take it to the commissioners before you do anything with it. And at the time, he knew that that road would allow access to the north half of the properties. If anybody wanted to subdivide, they could get access through that center road and then branch off either way, and it'd be no problem. Now, I heard Mr. Keegan's argument. I consider, based on what Willard told me, anything that interferes with that farming property an interference, if it's not agriculture, like a barn, haystack, or whatever. So a road to me, in any other part, would turn it into a subdivision. It would divide 2 parts of the agricultural land into 2 parts, which is totally prevented. And that's why we talked about that easement. He wanted to limit the size of that easement, I think 40 feet, center line and 20 on either side. So it didn't come into a big road. It was intended to be a nice 40-foot road to get you into the backside along the river where you could build your homes. And that was his intent. So if you have any questions.
Anything for Mr. Freeman?
No, certainly appreciate all your history on it.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, he really cared about keeping that preserved. So that was a big.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
And Sox, your memory was pretty good for 40 years.
Is there anyone else from the public that would like to speak? Yes, sir.
Third statement here.
Okay.
Good morning, Commissioners, Madam Chair. My name is Steve Anderson, and I live at 49 Pack Saddle Trail with my family. My wife, Ann, and I were notified by you that Mr. Craig Watts, a neighboring property owner, has challenged the Planning and Zoning Director's decision to deny Mr. Watts' request to widen Pack Saddle Trail to serve this proposed subdivision. We were pleased to hear that the planning and zoning director made the correct decision by denying Mr. Watts' request to further develop roads as dictated by the warranty deed of real property open space easement that was granted on December 18th, 1980 by former property owners Willard and Elaine Rhodes. The open space easement makes clear that Mr. and Mrs. Rhodes understood the significant wildlife, habitat value of their property, and they desired to preserve the land in perpetuity. We admire Mr. and Mrs. Rhodes' foresight to protect and preserve one of Park County's most valuable assets, its natural land resources. The land they sought to protect is critical elk habitat, which is being diminished all around us. In 2015, we paid a premium for our adjacent property because of the open space easement that Mr. and Mrs. Rhodes provided. If Mr. Watts is allowed to subdivide and develop his property, not only is he devaluing our property, but he is also dismissing Mr. and Mrs. Rhodes' vision for the land. It's our understanding that Mr. Watts' desire to subdivide his property would require a residential road to be established, which requires a minimum of 60-foot right-of-way. However, section 6 of the open space easements terms and conditions specifically states that the perpetual ingress and egress from US Highway 141620, namely Pack Saddle Trail, is not to exceed 20 feet on either side from the center line. In conclusion, Mr. and Mrs. Rhodes conveyed their trust in the Park County Board of Commissioners to forever uphold and maintain the terms and conditions of open space easement. We're asking you to respect and uphold this good faith agreement to protect this land. To do this, you must deny Mr. Watts' appeal. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public that would like to speak? Yes.
I'm Lori Stewart, and Livingston and I originally bought 70 acres, which is on Pack Saddle Trail and west of where we're talking about, in 1997. When that was going on, we bought it from Mr. Wells. When we were looking at purchasing it, we actually did a 1031 exchange with Mr. Wells. And unbeknownst to us, when we were in the middle of all of this, the Rhodes children came to us, and we were very upset that Mr. Wells even split it, the 160 acres, into 6 pieces. There was 2 10 acres and then the 2 70s, but he had the center line down the middle, so it was technically like 2 35s, and then the 10 on each side of Pack Saddle, which wasn't Pack Saddle at the time. Lee and I did name that. And we explained to the kids that if we understand where they were coming from, you know, he said what his intent was of his parents. He wanted the kids at the King's Ranch at the time that were for, you know, troubled kids or whatever, to have a place where they could irrigate, make hay, just learn some trades and work to keep them out of trouble. So that's why his parents did all of that. And we said, you know, but we understand where you're coming from. If we don't buy the land, somebody else is. And we explained our intentions. We were going to build a home and a barn on the property, but we were going to keep it ag. We were going to raise hay. We were going to take care of the fields. We were going to replant, reseed, whatever we needed to do to keep it in the highest production possible. We worked with the fences. We recently took down the fences so the elk can get through without tearing them down. And we wanted to make sure we honored the roads and what they tried to do. At the time when we bought the property, Dick Giving came to us and told us that we could not use Pack Saddle Trail. We could not use the driveway because in the open space easement and the original deed, it said it was for the successors and their heirs, or the executors and their heirs. So we had to come and talk to the county because we were under the impression that we couldn't even use our own driveway. and it was 100% our land. Pack Saddle Trail is not even on the center line. It was supposed to be on the center line of both pieces of property, 20 feet on either side. The entire road is on my property 100% right now. It's not even on the center line. So when Mr. Wells went to go sell the 10 acres to the Johns on the east side, the back 10 acres, he came to us and wanted Lee and I to give an easement for him. We said we could not do that. According to the documents on the deeds, we could not grant an easement to anybody on that because it was reserved for the heirs and the executors. So that is when Mr. Wells took it upon himself to just put a road in and sell it to the Johns. And that's how that all transpired. So I don't know if it ever came in front of the commissioners at that time or what happened. But when Lee and I bought that land, it was very clear to us that what the intent was, that that front parcel and the around area was to use for ag, taking care of the wildlife, and honoring the wishes of people. And when we purchased it, that's what we did. And we have not tried to change it. We don't want to change it. And right now we're seeing, the elk herd is diminishing. They have really the only way they can get from the river now with Copperleaf, and everything is a cliff behind our property down to the river bottom, so they can't even cross there. And when Don Gray bought the property, they now have a fence in there, the Bucking fence. It's a fence that they lay down every year so the elk can come through and come in. And I heard a comment earlier about Don Gray being okay with this. He's not, and I know he sent a letter and he sent to the commissioners. He also emailed me a letter, the copy. He's not okay with this. So I just wanted to add a little bit more to the history of when I originally purchased the property, and I knew what the intent was of the owners. Kids came to us, and I just feel like we need to honor their wishes with subdivisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments at this time? Yes, ma'am.
Madam Chair, Commissioners.
Yes.
I'm Mary McKinney, and I would just like to agree with things that everybody else has said, and that we need to consider the original intent of what that open space agreement was, and what the intent of that was, and what the intent of the variance request is, and what that is for, and that we need to consider our wildlife issues that are happening on the North Fork Valley at this time with all of the development. And we need to do something to diminish the impacts to our wildlife herds, certainly in those critical winter habitat areas that we've heard a lot about recently. I'm sure there's been other meetings that you've all attended. So we're all, I know that you are aware of that, and I'm sure people in the North Fork Valley are aware of as well. So as a landowner in that area, it's something that I'm certainly concerned about. And somebody has to advocate for them. They can't advocate for themselves. So we certainly need to do that. Also, okay, as a representative of the Weed and Pest District, I do need to say that with all this development that is happening in these priority areas, of which the North Fork certainly is, we have species of concern there, and all this rapid development there just increases the potential for those species to be moved around someplace else on equipment, et cetera. Even though we do our best to try to work with those developers so that doesn't happen, it still can occur. And with our weed management plans that we have, interestingly enough, we have found areas where we've never had certain species such as leafy spurge or perennial baby's breath before. So we are finding those particular species so that those weed management plans are beneficial in that respect. So we are spending tens of thousands of dollars, okay, in that program for those priority species. So I think it's important that we do recognize that development does increase those costs. So
okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Morning, Madam Commissioner. My name is Brian Mick and I live on the North Fork. I was here once upon a time actually speaking in favor of a subdivision because I believe that people have the right to do whatever's legally allowed with their property. And I get the idea of intent and original intent and maybe some concerns of the neighbors. But the fact of the matter is, it's the plain language of this easement that controls. And we know a little bit about it. My partner and I, Brad Updike, wrote a Creighton Law Review article specifically on conservation easements. If you want to really bore yourself or get to sleep at night, you can check it out. So, and I'm not practicing real estate law here in Wyoming, but I've done it for decades. So the planning director is spot on, period, end of story. The wagon trail should never have been approved, never should have been put in. Maybe it wasn't approved by you. It sounds like there was no history of it, but then that road never should have been installed. And she's spot on point that this easement cannot be revised. It's the four corners idea of a document. If the document is plain and unambiguous, it doesn't matter what the intent is. And it's interesting that Mr. Rhodes' lawyer here is here giving you the history of it. And if Mr. Rhodes would have said to you, let's make that easement maintain, improve, expand, pave, add a culvert, whatever the case may be, that language would have been included in the easement. The only thing that the easement holder of the dominant estate can do is maintain pack saddle trail. And it's incumbent upon you all. You have the obligation and the power to enforce specifically the terms of that easement. Somebody already mentioned section 6. Roads and ditches presently existing, not to exceed 20 feet from the center line. Grantor shall have the right to maintain the roadway. Period, end of story. Coke versus J&J Ranch, Wyoming Supreme Court, 2013. You interpret the plain language of the document. Another case that actually involved the Park County School District in 2002. Supreme Court held an easement is defined as an interest in land which entitles the easement holder to a limited use or enjoyment over another person's property per the terms of the easement document. So I think it's pretty clear here that there shouldn't even be a discussion. You don't have the power to amend an easement under the federal tax rules. You can't amend these easements. That's the other thing. You've got 4 different subcategories. You've got open space easements, conservation easements, historic facade easements, and the last one I can't remember. So, but the point is, you don't have the power to amend the terms of this easement. It's of record, and you got to follow it to the T. That's my only point. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Yes, sir.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, my name is Brian Clarkson. Thank you for the opportunity to give my opinion on this matter. I'm a landowner in the North Fork planning area, and I just want to talk about the enjoyment of the easement. I drive by this easement twice a day, every work day, and I'm always seeing elk there. I'm seeing the mule deer there. I'm seeing the sandhill cranes there. I'm also seeing people stopping and taking pictures, and I'll never get over that. I lived in an area where nobody would ever stop to take pictures, and people are always stopping to take pictures. And so I just think it's really important to preserve these open space easements, to preserve the valley, because there's not a lot of places left in the country like this. And I just want to, end it by quoting the Organic Act of 1872 and also the Roosevelt Arch, which is for the benefit and enjoyment of the people. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Yes, ma'am.
I just want to add one last thing.
Okay.
I'm sorry, but I did send you an email with the attachment of Arthur Middleton's some of the studies that have been done. And according to Wyoming Game and Fish, some of these studies, when building is taking place, it's only 2% that will keep the elk herd and the mule deer herd away because of the noise. So the development is the threshold is very limited. There's not a lot of threshold there.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, seeing no other public comment, if you would like to weigh in for the county attorney's office. Thank you.
My name is Mallory Riley, and I'm a deputy county attorney here in Park County. I have been tasked with reviewing this original easement document and reviewing the associated legal documents that stem from it. I have went through the chain of title. I went through the warranty deed of real property and open space easement and the subsequent amendment to it to clarify the information. There has been a considerable amount of discussion regarding the history, the intent, the value of wildlife. There's been a great discussion on this matter, but my purpose here is to largely add clarity and provide for the legal aspects of this, which have also been talked about. It is important to note that within this document, we agreed over 3 times that we will hold this in perpetuity, or as Director Hill mentioned, forever. That we will maintain and honor and defend, that we will preserve and protect. That is an obligation that it appears that the Board of County Commissioners at the time took upon itself, and that is still in force. As part of that, in section 3, we're looking at the language that has been discussed by now multiple attorneys in the room. That the grantors intend that the open space easements granted and reserved shall confine the property to the following uses. Those uses have been described. I'm not going to bother to rehash them. But that being said, that is the exclusive list. And further on, it says that if in section 4, grantors in the county, their successors and assigns expressly agree not to undertake any activity not specifically authorized herein without satisfying the conditions of this instrument. It then later goes on to provide that notice, or 1, to inform the other party of all aspects of proposed activity, and 2, that notice shall be sent by registered or certified mail, return receipt requested, and addressed, and then it gives an address of the county commissioners. There's no record of any notice being given that when the second road was being discussed, not Pack Saddle, the wagon road went into effect, that there was any notice given to commissioners. It is the county attorney's standpoint that such a road was a violation of the open space easement, and that is the obligation of the Board of County Commissioners to not allow for further violation. This particular document actually gives the ability to, in the event of a violation, to either terminate or terminate through injunction. So if there is already a paved road and that is supposed to be the argument for the reason why it should have a continued use, if it is the opinion and direction of the Board of County Commissioners that such a road is in violation, then they can go ahead and terminate and enjoin the use of that road per the agreement. There is nothing within here that says that roads are permitted, especially to serve, well, it says that reasonable accommodations can be made to allow for agricultural, wildlife, and ranching use. There has been no discussion henceforth that there is any intention for the subdivision to be providing for wildlife, agricultural, or ranching use. In many ways, the subdivision can be considered the antithesis of any of those uses. That being said, one of the things that was brought up by Mr. Keegan that was corrected by Director Joy was that the list of uses that are not permitted is not exhaustive or inclusive, meaning that there are more things than what is listed in points A through F under section 3 that are not permitted, including further development, further roads, expansion, and violations of the open space easement. That is the position of the county attorney in this matter, and I would like to open myself up for any questions that the Board of County Commissioners may have.
Any questions at this time? Thank you. Okay, I'll ask one more time for any public comment before we close the public hearing.
Madam Chair, briefly, if I could.
Yes, sir.
I'd just like to, I'm sorry to recognize you, I know you're not before. Okay. Good to see you. So I don't know how you, when it says are not exhaustive and inclusive, I don't know how you expand an easement without agreement. I don't think that's possible. I mean, the suggestion that somehow the county gets to do whatever it wants and have a greater list is contrary to the contract. We can have agreement to do some more, but the suggestion that somehow on your own you can expand it, I don't think is supported by the law or by this document. And roads are necessary for ranching or agricultural purposes. And if what you're saying is that these would have to be agriculture or ranching lots, I think that that would be a workable solution. And something that my client would certainly consider. Going back to the intent of way back when, I don't think that's relevant when you've got, as Mr. Nick said, a clear and unambiguous document. This is what you have to work with. This is it. So,
Thank you. Seeing no other public comment?
Madam Chair, I'll move we close public hearing.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to close the public hearing. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Public hearing is closed. Considerations from the board. Commissioner Sheldon?
Yeah, Madam Chair, you know, one thing I think we need to be conscious of, we're not talking about whether the property can be subdivided or not. We're talking about the appeal as to whether the property and the access to the property is in violation of the open space easement that we have. And that's what we're basing our decision on. And to me, from reading the document, and one of the things that got me on page 3, in the first paragraph, it shows those things that are prohibited. In paragraph A, it says the subdivision or de facto subdivision of the property or of any lot split thereof is prohibited. So to me, wagon trails should never been built because that's a de facto subdivision of the property. You take a contiguous piece of property and build a road right to the middle of it. That's in violation of the open space agreement. I guess with that being said, it's very apparent to me that the appeal should be denied, and I'll make the motion that we deny the appeal based on the fact that it is a violation of the open space agreement, which obviously Mr. and Mrs. Rose put a lot of thought and heart into. I think we should honor their request.
I have a second for discussion.
Okay, I have a second motion and a second for open for discussion.
Madam Chair, I don't disagree with Commissioner Tilden, although I believe the appeal is on pack saddle. Is that correct?
No.
The
Something
appeal
like that.
written right here
Well,
says pack saddle on my information. Correct?
Yes, that's
Yes.
correct. And that's why you can't expand beyond.
Right, and
Right,
in the widening of pack saddle
Okay.
trail.
Okay,
Right.
yeah.
So wagon trail, you know, we can sit here and argue whether it was in violation, which I tend to agree it was based, it was built to access the northern property, which was not a part of agriculture, ranching, or wildlife. So I don't deny the fact that that is. However, I guess for the discussion part, I agree the appeal should be denied for the purpose of, just like you said, it's black and white here as far as I'm concerned, right away. Use of the land for agriculture, ranching, wildlife purposes, and it's clearly states in the appeal the intent to subdivide. So the widening this road for the intent of subdivision does not fall under that. I'm no lawyer either, but it seems pretty clear to me.
Madam Chair, I agree with Mr. Tilden about we ask for, it's nice to have grantors like this, like the roads. And we understand their intent to preserve the last great place up the North Fork. And I think any changes of the open space agreement would discourage other grantors who have the same idea. I know a lot of people who live and have those properties are looking at, look at the money I can make here, but there are people in it, up on the North Fork and other parts of Park County that would like to preserve what we have right now. And that open space agreement, yes, there are some issues with the actual document. It was written a long time ago, but I think that's something we can improve on. And we also have to trust the planning and zoning group and Joy and her staff on filtering out some of these for us and giving us some direction on it. So I would have to agree with the commissioners that, yeah, denial of this appeal is something that I'd be for.
Any further discussion on the motion on the floor? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, motion passes, the appeal is denied. Thank you for coming. So what do I say? So finding what the document says about the road width being a maximum of 20 feet on either side. Okay, you can come up, okay.
Madam Chair, I need to put into the record resolution 2022-97 for the denial of the Craig Watts open space.
Thank you.
Wagon Trail Road, if it is a violation, is only at the very end of it where access is.
Let's circle back later on.
See you.
Okay,
Thank you, Ms. Wellington.
thank you.
Good luck with the election.
Right.
Yeah, there's one piece in there that wasn't brought forward, but it's, if you look at the deed from Rhodes to Kings Ranch, the language in there says that Pax Sabbath Trail is reserved for them only to access the property to the north. I can show it to you. The language actually says, that language actually says.
That's what all the rules say.
Only they can use it to move that property. I'll show it to you. That's one thing that was missed.
Okay, the next thing on our agenda, I apologize for being late. We had kind of a long public hearing, but we'll move forward now. So we have Keith Frantic and Sons of the American Revolution with a presentation on the Spanish-American War veterans buried in Park County.
Thank you. Cool. So I'm here, as Darcy said, representing the Sons of the American Revolution, our local chapter, and our members are here. Some of them, we're a small organization. In order to be a member of the Sons of the American Revolution, you have to show through legal documentation that you have an ancestor who was in the Revolutionary War. Not an easy thing to do. And so we're always going to be a small group, and with one exception, geezers mostly, and
Which one's not?
None of us fought a war like that. So anyway, we're a small organization, as I said, and we do community service projects. We get together and find things that we think can be done with our very limited resources and limited time that we have available. One of the things that we have been doing over about the past 3 or 4 year period, we identified Civil War, Spanish-American War, and World War I as areas that we could provide some designation to the veterans who had served in those wars and are buried here in Park County. And so we've made 2 presentations to this group prior to this one. One was regarding World War I. We had a listing of all of the World War I veterans who were buried in Park County, and we made that into a large plaque. And that is, you guys put it in the archives over at the library. And Walt and the rest of these guys have done so much research involved in that. Walt in particular is a genius with this stuff. And so we were able to find, we think all of them, of course, you can never be sure, about 160, 165.
I believe so, yes,
like
World
that,
War I.
World War I veterans. So we did that, and we thought, I wonder if there are any Civil War veterans buried. So we started looking at that, and we, believe it or not, found 14 Civil War veterans buried in Park County. And since then, we found one more, that gentleman right there. Once again, we made this plaque and presented it to you guys, and then also over there by Scott are the replicas that we placed on their graves. So we actually marked the grave sites of those Civil War veterans with those bronze place markers. And those are duplicates of what was issued by the United States government at the end of the Civil War for all the Union soldiers. So that left one more that we could think of, and that was the Spanish-American War. So we figured, if we found 15 Civil War vets, we got to find quite a few Spanish-American War vets. That didn't work out. There just aren't that many. So at this stage, we've identified these Spanish-American War veterans, and they are buried in Riverside Cemetery and also at Crown Hill in Powell. Once again, Walt here has worked up this beautiful plaque that we'd like to present to you guys at this time. Pass this around and take a look. And this is, we believe, all of the Spanish-American War veterans who are buried in the park. The Spanish-American War lasted for only a few months. And interestingly enough, all of the Wyoming people ended up in the Philippines mostly. Can I say all of them, or?
I believe all of them ended up in the Philippines.
Okay, so they were a ways away and served the country for a few months during the Spanish period. So those were just 3 conflicts that we identified that we felt we could enhance maybe the public's knowledge of that, and perhaps someone in the future could do research and find that to be valuable, or to just go to the Park County Archives and take a look. What did I miss? What can we add to that, gentlemen?
No, that's what we've done.
Okay, so anyway, there you are, Spanish American War vets buried in Park County. Any questions I can entertain?
Keith, where's this headstone at?
Where's it?
Where's this at?
Garland.
Garland, I think it's on the bottom.
Garland Park.
Yeah. Let's see. Oh, Garland Park, Wyoming. No, I didn't. Oh, Garland, Park,
Garland.
Wyoming. Yeah,
Oh,
Garland.
okay, Park, okay.
Yeah.
So it's still in Garland then?
Downtown Garland.
Madam
Okay.
Chair, have you found any veterans from any of your searches in Valley Cemetery?
No, none in Valley, none in Bull Creek, none. We found, in terms of, the Civil War, we found one in, Bed Buttes.
Okay.
In Clark.
Arlen.
Arlen, which it's actually a cemetery on private property on the Deetsy Creek. So he was a veteran of the Civil War. So we've scoured about every location that we might expect to find, someone
That
buried
stays with the archive.
of that
Oh,
age.
this is?
I can take it up there.
As Keith pointed out, one of the things that we have obviously Sons of the American Revolution chapters and societies all over the country. You get a magazine, and if you read that, the Virginia group is doing such and such, and the Pennsylvania group, and of course, they're actually identifying, veterans of the Revolutionary War. Well, there weren't any of those that came to Park County. So that's one of the reasons, as Keith mentioned, that we're honing in on, those wars. And again, the Spanish-American War is an international war. It didn't last that long. The state of Wyoming archives at the University of Wyoming have done a wonderful job talking about the 2 main companies of Wyoming veterans that went almost exclusively, to the best of my knowledge, to the Philippines, not to Cuba. And we do have 2 of those individuals that were part of the Wyoming contingent that ended up here in Park County. But it's really hard to trace some of these, but as I've tried to do, and I think the rest of us have tried to do, we've really tried to look at not just the fact that they were a member, of a unit, but when we presented these plaques, I've compiled their history, and talked about who they were married to, where they lived, what they did. And when we put these plaques in, we actually, give a little rendition, talk about who they were. Now, we didn't do that with World War I with 160, and we didn't place plaques. But the Civil War, we did, and we will continue to do that, obviously, with the Spanish-American War. But it's interesting because the state of Wyoming now has the historical newspaper project that you can go to, and you can read obituaries, you can, get information from the Cody Enterprise or the other county newspapers right online. So you can read something about, well, so-and-so came from Sunlight and came down to Cody, and that's where he ended up, or what. So that's one of the things that we try and do to make it a personal. I actually contacted a descendant of one of the individuals, and they were just absolutely pleased that, someone had taken the time to deal with one of their great grandparents, and I sent them all the information we had, and it's been rewarded. It's
Appreciate it. Our most famous one was Liver Eaton Johnson. Out here in Old Trail Town. He was in the Union Army for a very brief time.
Originally interred in California.
He was a good one.
Yeah.
Originally buried in California.
Correct, yeah.
Would you mind taking a picture with your plaque that we can also get the picture up to the archives?
Sure. We get this whole group in here. That'd be fine.
Yes.
John?
We need you guys.
Maybe John, maybe somebody else would take.
John is a member, so.
Well, I'll give one here and then.
Or you got the cold or just getting ready to go?
I got a semi waiting on me down below.
Which one?
Bridge.
Hmm?
Bridge. What's up?
I think Zach could take it if you want.
Bridge material.
I'll take a picture.
Yours a good one anyway.
I wouldn't say that.
Okay, you do us all?
Yeah, I'm gonna get away from the.
I looked at the agenda. And I thought,
Well, I didn't think.
Do you want to sign the stuff that he has to take off? Okay, thank you. Walt, if you'll just set it there, I'll get it up to the archives.
Thank you. Did some of these soldiers have Filipino wives? No?
Not that I know of, no. I mean, every one of the individuals that I looked at and could find information, was it really interesting because one of them was actually a student in Denver that when he came back, from the conflict in the Philippines, he ended up he was in school, he was a student, he was listed, his enlistment as a student. That was his job per se. And he came and didn't live very long. I don't know if he died of disease, that I couldn't find, but all of the ones that I've found, just had wives that they either met here and some of them, you have to realize they were from other states that they relocated, to Great Wyoming, with the land rush or whatever it might be. So.
Cool. Thanks, you guys, for taking time to
Oh,
hear.
thank you.
Appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Great.
Happy Veterans Day.
Thank you.
We're always looking for new members. So if any of you know, you can trace your family back to the 1700s. We'd love to have you.
All right.
Mine came over from Germany, so.
That's where my family is. 1750.
They were probably on the wrong side of the war too. so.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Move we agree, adjourn?
We agree, that ain't gonna happen. Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor?
All right.